Jake Murphy had seen some ridiculous things in his 38 years. He'd watched politicians declare victory while standing in burning cities. He'd seen generals plan invasions on napkins. Hell, he'd even sat through a Pentagon briefing where someone seriously suggested training dolphins to deliver nuclear warheads. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the sheer cosmic stupidity of the Galactic Ethics Committee. The committee chamber looked like someone had asked a toddler to design the United Nations building after feeding them nothing but sugar and sci-fi movies for a week. Floating platforms, holographic displays, and enough chrome to blind a small star. Jake sat in what the aliens probably thought was an honor seat but felt more like a dentist chair designed by someone who'd never seen teeth. Around him, the 5 warring species postured and preened like peacocks at a beauty pageant. To his left, the Valorians stood at attention in their ridiculous golden armor, looking like someone had crossbred a Roman centurion with a disco ball. Their leader, Commander Thex, kept adjusting his cape every 30 seconds because apparently looking fabulous was part of their military doctrine. The collective's representative didn't have a name, just a designation, Primary Node 7742. It looked like a walking computer server with too many blinking lights, and it spoke in that insufferably calm voice that all hive minds seemed to think made them sound wise instead of creepy. Then there were the Mercantile Union delegates, led by Trade Admiral Kess, who'd somehow managed to turn military uniforms into business suits. They kept checking their wrist computers, probably calculating profit margins on ammunition sales even during peace talks. The archivist sent Professor Nim, an elderly creature that looked like a cross between a librarian and a praying mantis, complete with thick spectacles and a tendency to quote ancient texts at inappropriate moments. And finally, the Blade Dancers. Their representative, Flowwalker Zenth, moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd trained their entire life to kill people beautifully while composing poetry about it. Jake found them simultaneously impressive and deeply concerning. All 5 species were locked in what they called the Epsilon conflict, a war over mining rights to some asteroid belt that probably contained enough rare minerals to power a small galaxy. Instead of just fighting it out like normal species, they'd decided to drag the whole thing before the Galactic Ethics Committee to determine whose approach to warfare was most morally justified. Jake had been invited as Earth's representative because, according to the invitation, humans had a unique perspective on the ethical conduct of warfare. The irony wasn't lost on him. If these aliens knew anything about human military history, they'd have run screaming in the opposite direction instead of asking for his opinion. But here he was, watching 5 supposedly advanced civilizations argue about who had the moral high ground while planning to blow each other into constituent atoms. The committee chair, some purple blob called Moderator Vex, had been droning on for 3 hours about establishing parameters for ethical engagement and maintaining dignity in conflict resolution. Jake checked his watch. He had a poker game back on Earth in 6 hours, and these clowns were nowhere near finished with their philosophical circle jerk. The Valorian Code of Honor. Commander Thex announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd never lost an argument because he'd never encountered anyone willing to contradict him, represents the pinnacle of civilized warfare. We challenge our enemies to single combat, with designated champions fighting in predetermined locations according to ancient ritual. Jake almost choked on his coffee. Single combat. In a war over mining rights. These people were treating interstellar conflict like a medieval tournament. Our approach minimizes casualties, Thex continued, apparently proud of himself, and ensures that only the most skilled warriors determine the outcome of battles. Victory goes to the honorable, as it should. Primary Node 7742 flickered its lights in what Jake assumed was the collective equivalent of clearing its throat. The Valorian approach is inefficient. The collective offers a more humanitarian solution, complete assimilation. Rather than destroying enemy forces, we absorb them into our consciousness. No death, no suffering, merely transformation into a more perfect form of existence. Jake's eyebrow twitched. They were calling forced mental slavery humanitarian. That was a new one. Trade Admiral Kess leaned forward, her four arms gesturing dramatically. Both approaches ignore economic reality. The mercantile union conducts warfare as a business transaction. We calculate the cost-benefit ratio of each engagement, minimize waste, and negotiate buyouts when possible. War should be profitable for all parties involved, or it shouldn't happen at all. Profitable for all parties, Jake muttered under his breath. Right, because nothing says ethical warfare like a quarterly earnings report. Professor Nim adjusted her spectacles and spoke in the dusty voice of someone who'd spent too many centuries in libraries. The archivist approach transcends these primitive methodologies. We preserve our enemy's cultural heritage even as we defeat them. Every battle becomes a learning opportunity. We document their military strategies, preserve their art, and ensure their civilization's legacy survives even after we've conquered their territories. Jake blinked. They were turning genocide into a museum exhibit. Finally, Flowwalker Zenth glided forward, moving like water given form. When they spoke, their voice had the rhythm of poetry. The blade dancers understand that warfare is art made manifest. Each engagement becomes a dance, each victory a verse in the grand poem of existence. We honor our enemies by killing them beautifully, ensuring their deaths have meaning and grace. They write poetry about murder, Jake said to nobody in particular. They literally compose haikus while committing war crimes. Moderator Vex pulsed with what Jake assumed was excitement. Excellent presentations all. Each species has demonstrated remarkable sophistication in their approach to ethical warfare. Now, Representative Murphy, we would very much like to hear about humanity's enlightened perspective on these matters. The chamber fell silent. 10 alien eyes or sensor arrays or whatever the collective used focused on Jake with the expectation of someone about to witness profound wisdom. Jake looked around the room at these self-proclaimed paragons of military ethics, the honor-obsessed Valorians who thought war was a game, the collective that justified brainwashing as mercy, the union that treated conquest like a corporate merger, the archivists who turned cultural destruction into academic research, the blade dancers who made murder into performance art. You want to know about human military ethics, Jake said slowly. Indeed, Moderator Vex burbled. Your species' unique insights into the moral conduct of warfare. Jake set down his coffee cup and leaned back in his chair. Well, you asked for it. You know what's funny about human military ethics? Jake began, his voice carrying the tone of someone about to ruin everyone's day. We actually have them. Written down and everything. Treaties, conventions, rules of engagement, the whole 9 yards. Problem is, we also have a 5,000-year history of finding creative ways to ignore them. The aliens leaned forward, expecting wisdom. They were about to get something else entirely. Let's start with the basics. Early humans figured out that hitting people with rocks was effective, so we made better rocks. Then we tied rocks to sticks. Then we figured out how to throw rocks really far with other sticks. We called it technology advancement. But really it was just our ongoing quest to kill each other from increasingly ridiculous distances. Commander Thex looked confused. But surely your warriors maintained codes of honor? Oh, we tried that. Ancient Greeks had all sorts of rules about proper combat. Problem was, they also invented Greek fire, which was basically medieval napalm. Turns out honor codes don't mean much when you're literally setting your enemies on fire with a substance that burns underwater. Primary node 7742's lights flickered uncertainly. But you must have evolved past such primitive methods. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Instead, we got really good at industrializing death. World War I, we invented poison gas, machine guns, and trench warfare. Turned battlefields into meat grinders where people died by the thousands for a few yards of mud. We were so horrified by our own efficiency that we banned chemical weapons. A wise decision, Professor Nim observed. Sure, except we immediately started working on bigger explosives. World War II, we invented radar-guided bombs, rocket artillery, and flamethrowers. Oh, and we split the atom and dropped the sun on 2 cities, just to see what would happen. The chamber had gone very quiet. Then we invented nuclear submarines, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and mutually assured destruction. That's where we decided that if someone attacks us, we'll end civilization as we know it. Not just defeat them, mind you. End everything. Scorched earth policy applied to entire planets. Trade Admiral Kess's 4 arms had stopped gesturing. Surely this is hyperbole. Lady, we've got enough nuclear weapons to kill every living thing on Earth 12 times over. We keep them around for deterrence. That's our word for threatening to commit species-wide suicide if anyone annoys us too much. Jake was warming up now, really getting into the spirit of things. But that's just the conventional stuff. We also invented biological warfare, psychological operations, and information warfare. We figured out how to destroy enemy morale before the shooting even starts. We've got military manuals on how to turn civilian populations against their own governments using nothing but social media and fake news. Flo Walker-Zenth had stopped moving entirely, which Jake was pretty sure meant they were either meditating or having an existential crisis. And here's the beautiful part, Jake continued. We made rules for all of this. Geneva Conventions, laws of war, rules of engagement. We wrote down exactly how we're supposed to kill each other politely. Then we spend most of our time figuring out loopholes. Loopholes? Moderator Vex asked weakly. Oh yeah, can't torture prisoners, but enhanced interrogation is fine. Can't target civilians, but collateral damage happens. Can't use chemical weapons. But tear gas is okay for crowd control. We're really good at finding the technical differences between war crimes and aggressive peacekeeping. Jake paused to take a sip of his coffee, enjoying the absolute silence in the chamber. The thing about human military thinking is that we approach warfare like it's a puzzle to be solved. Every defense has a counter, every strategy has a counter-strategy. We've been at war with ourselves for so long that we've basically figured out every possible way to break things and hurt people. He looked around the room at the increasingly pale alien faces. You want to know our approach to ethical warfare? We don't have one. We have laws we pretend to follow and weapons we pretend aren't as horrible as they actually are. Our idea of military ethics is agreeing not to use our worst toys unless someone really pisses us off. The silence stretched on. So, Jake said cheerfully, anyone want to tell me more about your honor codes? Nobody answered Jake's question. Commander Thex was staring at his golden armor like he'd just realized it was made of cardboard. Primary node 7742's lights had dimmed to what Jake assumed was the collective equivalent of stunned silence. Trade Admiral Kess was frantically calculating something on her wrist computer, probably trying to figure out the profit margins on planetary annihilation. I'm sorry, Professor Nim said in a voice that had gotten significantly smaller. Did you say you dropped the sun on cities? Well, miniature suns. Nuclear fusion, same basic principle. Turns out when you split atoms or smash them together, they release the same energy that powers stars. We figured this out and immediately thought, hey, what if we put this in a bomb? How many of these weapons do you possess? Flo Walker-Zenth asked, their poetic voice reduced to a whisper. Globally? About 13,000 nuclear warheads at last count. The United States and Russia have most of them, but China, France, Britain, India, Pakistan, and North Korea all have some. Oh, and Israel probably has a few, but they won't admit it. We like to keep it mysterious. The aliens exchanged glances that clearly communicated, are these people insane? But surely, Moderator Vex said desperately, these weapons are kept as a last resort? You'd think so. But we also invented tactical nuclear weapons. Those are the small ones for battlefield use, because apparently regular explosives weren't exciting enough. We've got nuclear artillery shells, nuclear torpedoes, nuclear mines. We even considered nuclear-powered aircraft. But that turned out to be stupid even by our standards. Jake was really enjoying himself now. Then there's our conventional military thinking. We invented something called total war, which is where you don't just fight the enemy army, you destroy their entire capacity to make war. Factories, infrastructure, civilian morale, everything. Sherman's march to the sea, the bombing of Dresden, the firebombing of Tokyo. We're really good at breaking entire civilizations. Trade Admiral Kess looked up from her calculations. What's your casualty ratio in these conflicts? Depends on the war. World War II killed about 3% of the global population. But that was amateur hour compared to what we could do now. Modern military doctrine assumes we can destroy any nation-state in about 6 hours using conventional weapons. Nuclear weapons just speed up the process. 6 hours? Professor Nim's voice cracked. Give or take. We've got stealth bombers, cruise missiles, satellite-guided munitions, and cyber warfare capabilities. We can take out power grids, communications networks, transportation systems simultaneously. Then we drop bombs on anything that looks important until it stops looking important. The chamber was getting uncomfortably quiet. But here's the really fun part, Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the growing horror around him. We also invented guerrilla warfare, insurgency tactics, and asymmetric warfare. That's where a smaller force uses terrorism, sabotage, and hit-and-run tactics to defeat a larger conventional army. We're really good at both sides of that equation. How good? Commander Thex asked, though he seemed to regret the question immediately. Well, we spent 20 years in Afghanistan fighting people with improvised explosive devices and small arms, and they basically won by outlasting us. But we also invented counterinsurgency doctrine, which is how to defeat guerrilla fighters by turning their own population against them. It's all about hearts and minds, which is military speak for be nice to people while you're occupying their country. Jake paused to consider his next words carefully. Oh, and we invented information warfare. That's where you destroy enemy morale and decision-making capacity using propaganda, misinformation, and psychological operations. We can start civil wars without firing a shot, just by convincing people their government is lying to them. Which, to be fair, governments usually are. The aliens were looking increasingly uncomfortable, like dinner guests who'd just realized they were at a cannibal's house. The thing is, Jake said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, we got so good at warfare that we finally scared ourselves. The Cold War was 40 years of two superpowers pointing enough nuclear weapons at each other to end human civilization, just to see who would blink first. Turns out, when you're really good at destroying things, you eventually realize you might destroy yourself. He looked around the room at the 5 species who'd been so proud of their military ethics just an hour ago. So that's human military doctrine. We'll fight anyone, anywhere, using any means necessary. We'll follow the rules of war right up until those rules become inconvenient, then we'll find new rules. And if you really make us angry, we'll skip the rules entirely and just break everything until you stop being a problem. Jake finished his coffee and set the cup down with a satisfied clink. Any other questions about human ethics? The first to break was Professor Nim. She stood up slowly, her scholarly robes rustling with what Jake assumed was advanced alien terror. The Archivist Council. She announced in a voice that shook only slightly, withdraws from the Epsilon conflict immediately. This matter is beneath our academic interests. Jake had to admire the spin. Beneath our academic interests was certainly a diplomatic way of saying we don't want humans to notice we exist. Trade Admiral Kess was next, her forearms moving frantically over her wrist computer. The Mercantile Union's economic analysis indicates that continued conflict represents an unacceptable risk to our investment portfolio. We're diversifying into other sectors. Immediately. Jake nodded approvingly. Smart business decision. Hard to collect profits when your entire species has been converted into radioactive dust. Commander Thex looked like someone had explained to him that his shiny armor was actually made of tissue paper. The Valorian Code of Honor, he said with the careful dignity of someone trying not to cry, demands that we only engage in conflicts between equals. This dispute is clearly unworthy of our martial traditions. That was actually pretty clever, Jake thought. Turn cowardice into honor by claiming the fight wasn't fair. Which, to be honest, it really wasn't. Primary node 7742's lights flickered in what might have been the collective equivalent of nervous laughter. The collective has determined that assimilation of species with human military advisors represents an inefficient use of resources. We are reallocating our expansion priorities. Reallocating expansion priorities. Jake had to give them credit for bureaucratic creativity. We're too scared to fight became strategic resource management. That left Flow Walker Zenth, who had been standing perfectly still for the last 10 minutes. Jake was starting to wonder if the Blade Dancers had some kind of shutdown protocol for existential crises. Finally, Zenth spoke, their voice carrying none of its earlier poetic rhythm. The dance of war requires partners who understand the steps. This is not a dance. This is, they paused, searching for words. The Blade Dancers withdraw from all current conflicts. We must meditate on what we have learned. And with that, Zenth simply disappeared. Not teleported, not walked away, just gone, like they'd decided that existing in the same universe as human military doctrine was too dangerous. Jake looked around the now mostly empty chamber. The 5 great powers of the Epsilon sector had just simultaneously decided that their massive interstellar war wasn't worth fighting anymore. All because one human had spent 20 minutes explaining why threatening each other was a bad idea when humans were involved. Moderator Vex was still there, pulsing with what Jake assumed was shock. Representative Murphy, the purple blob said weakly, "I don't suppose Earth would be interested in joining our peacekeeping forces?" "Oh, hell no," Jake said immediately. "Last time we tried peacekeeping, we ended up with 3 more wars and a refugee crisis. We're really bad at the whole keeping peace thing. We're much better at the making everyone too scared to fight thing." "I see." Moderator Vex pulsed uncertainly. "And if conflicts arise in the future?" Jake shrugged. "Call us if you need someone to explain to the combatants why violence is a bad idea. We're apparently pretty good at that. Just don't ask us to actually stop any wars. We'd probably end up conquering everyone involved just to keep them from annoying us." Noted, Moderator Vex said faintly. "Will you be requiring an escort back to Earth?" "Nah, I've got a ride. Thanks for the coffee, though. And hey, thanks for the entertainment. It's not every day I get to watch 5 civilizations have simultaneous nervous breakdowns." Jake stood up and headed for the exit, pausing at the door to add, "Oh, and if anyone asks, you might want to mention that I'm retired military. I'm actually one of the nice ones. You really don't want to meet our current generals. They're much less patient than I am." The door slid shut behind him, leaving Moderator Vex alone with the horrifying realization that humanity's diplomatic representative was apparently their idea of a peaceful moderate. Outside in the corridor, Jake checked his watch. 4 hours until his poker game. Plenty of time to get home and maybe grab dinner. He pulled out his communication device and started composing his mission report. Day 1 of Galactic diplomacy, he dictated. Accidentally ended interstellar war by explaining human military history. Recommend future diplomatic strategy, continue being ourselves. Galaxy appears appropriately concerned about human capabilities. Mission successful. No shots fired. All combatants withdrew voluntarily. He paused, then added, Also recommend against accepting any more diplomatic missions. Apparently we're too scary for civilized society. Jake's transport back to Earth was surprisingly comfortable, though he noticed the alien crew gave him a lot of extra space and kept asking if he needed anything. Word traveled fast in the galactic community. Apparently, he spent the flight writing his official report for the State Department, trying to explain how he'd accidentally ended a 5-way interstellar war by giving a basic overview of human military history. The hardest part was making it sound intentional rather than admitting he'd just gotten annoyed with alien pomposity and decided to vent. The diplomatic mission achieved all stated objectives, he wrote. The Epsilon conflict has been resolved through non-violent means. All 5 participating species have withdrawn from hostilities and expressed no interest in resuming military actions. Recommend continued policy of selective transparency regarding human military capabilities. What he didn't write was that he'd scared 5 entire civilizations into pacifism by casually mentioning things that most humans considered basic historical knowledge. Maybe it was better that way. His communication device chimed with an incoming message from the Galactic Ethics Committee. Jake opened it expecting some kind of formal thank you or diplomatic pleasantries. Instead, he found a politely worded request that Earth never, under any circumstances, provide military advisors to any galactic conflicts. The committee also asked if humanity would consider a non-aggression consultation service, where human representatives could explain to potential combatants why warfare was generally inadvisable. Jake laughed out loud. They wanted to hire humans as professional scary people. Don't fight this war, or the humans might notice you exist. There was also a personal note from Moderator Vex, Representative Murphy. The committee would like to formally thank you for your educational presentation. We had no idea that humanity's reputation for military excellence was based on such a comprehensive historical foundation. We will ensure that this information is shared with appropriate parties to prevent future conflicts. Please convey our respect and admiration to your species, along with our sincere hope that we never do anything to anger you. Jake forwarded the message to his supervisor with a note, "Mission accomplished. Recommend we start charging consulting fees for this." The transport docked at Luna Station 6 hours later. Jake caught a shuttle to Earth, made it to his poker game with time to spare, and spent the evening taking money from his friends while carefully not mentioning that he'd just become the galaxy's most effective peace negotiator. 2 weeks later, Jake received another message from the Galactic Ethics Committee. 3 more interstellar conflicts had been resolved when the committee simply forwarded recordings of Jake's presentation to the combatants. Apparently, the humans explained their military doctrine to us had become the galactic equivalent of showing war footage to peace activists. Jake was offered a permanent position as Earth's diplomatic deterrent specialist. He turned it down. He'd already proven his point. Humanity didn't need to threaten anyone. They just needed to be honest about their capabilities. Besides, he had a poker game to get back to. And unlike galactic diplomacy, poker was actually challenging. The final line of his mission report read, "Recommended future strategy, continue being ourselves. The galaxy will handle the rest." 6 months later, applications for Earth's Diplomatic Protection Service were backing up faster than the State Department could process them. It turned out that having humans casually mention their military history was the most effective peacekeeping tool in galactic history. Jake Murphy, retired strategist and accidental galactic peacekeeper, never did take another diplomatic mission. He didn't need to. The recording of his 12-second explanation of human warfare was being used as a standard peacekeeping tool across 17 star systems. Sometimes the best way to prevent wars, Jake reflected, was to explain to everyone involved exactly how good you were at fighting them. Mission accomplished indeed.